Imagine a country where there is no Coca-Cola, no Netflix, no App Store, no iPhone, and not even any light at night. A place where, to watch cartoons, you have to receive a USB drive like it's contraband. This is not science fiction. This is Cuba, where modernity is stalled, imagination is stifled, and the most chilling part isn't the lack of things, but the silence of a society that has forgotten what it means to dream, to choose, and to live differently. Join us as we uncover the strange and compelling truths about Cuba, the country forgotten by time in today's documentary. Cuba, the country with no official Coca-Cola. You may be living in a world where Coca-Cola is everywhere, from the peak of Everest to the Amazon jungle, from Dubai airports to African supermarkets. But in Cuba, Coca-Cola is the outcast, not a can, not a drop, not a trace. No store carries it. Coca-Cola, the global symbol of modernity, has completely vanished from this island nation, and no one clearly explains why. Is it due to shortages, a weak economy, or is something deeper and more dangerous being hidden? The truth is, Coca-Cola is not absent, it was exiled. After the Cuban Revolution, the government confiscated the Coca-Cola plant, turned it into state property, and since then, created a replacement, a local cola called Tu Cola, meaning your cola. Sounds normal? It's not. Because Tu Cola isn't just a soft drink, it's an ideological weapon. In the eyes of the Cuban government, Coca-Cola represents American imperialism. And if you control what people drink every day, you also control how they think, how they live, and how they view the world. But the cost is all too clear. Cuban citizens don't get a choice. They're not allowed to drink a simple soda because that drink carries with it a forbidden culture. And this doesn't stop at Coca-Cola. It extends to iPhones, Netflix, App Store, TikTok, Amazon, all vanished as if they never existed. So when you don't find Coca-Cola in Cuba, don't think it's a small matter. You're touching the thin ice of an invisible battlefield, where even a soda can become a political statement. What would you think if one day your favorite drink was completely banned just because it came from another country? Leave a comment below. Would you choose Tu Cola or Coca-Cola? Film bans, culture blockades, Cuba in the shadows of entertainment. In Cuba, you can't watch a new Marvel movie. Not because you're poor, not because you don't have Wi-Fi, but because it simply doesn't exist. No Netflix, no HBO, no YouTube Kids, no TikTok, no Spotify, no ChatGPT, and certainly no choice. Instead of tapping play on a screen, children here pass around USB sticks filled with old cartoons, as if exchanging something illegal. Cartoons, music, even international news. All are whispered about, hidden, and shared in silence. Not for piracy, but for violating ideological limits. In Cuba, watching a foreign film is a stroke of luck. Movie theaters still exist physically, but inside, they're nothing more than abandoned storage rooms. No flashy posters, no popcorn, no excited atmosphere. Just an old room with a small wooden table, selling a few candies, some apples, and sometimes even cigarettes. While the rest of the world is excited about cinematic universes, Cuba has only one universe, the one approved by the party. There, every movie must be reviewed, scenes cut, and most importantly, be ideologically aligned. Endings are edited, messages are distorted, and imagination is locked behind a political window. But the scariest part is not the lack of internet or new movies or Billie Eilish. It's this: no one feels like they're missing anything. When you're cut off from the global flow of culture, you don't just lose entertainment, you lose connection. No memes, no news, no trends, no concept of AI, no stories to tell. In Cuba, you're not forbidden to speak. You simply have nothing left to say. And that is the most dangerous form of control, when silence is not imposed by violence, but maintained through a total absence of imagination. In my personal view, the scariest thing about Cuba isn't the lack of internet or movies. It's that people no longer feel like they're missing anything. When imagination is strangled from birth, silence needs no enforcement. It arises on its own, and that is the most dangerous form of control, making people forget they ever had the right to dream, to connect, and to choose. Cuba, when blackouts become a way of life. In Cuba, light isn't free. It's paid for with fuel, privilege, and the roar of generators. In most of the world, a power outage is an emergency. In Cuba, it's a national routine. In some places, the power goes out for 6 hours a day. In others, it disappears for a whole week without warning. People no longer ask, when will the power go out? But will we be lucky today? And if you think this is temporary, think again. In Cuba, darkness has become the default state. But the truly frightening part isn't the blackout itself. It's who is allowed to have electricity. Don't assume that just because you have wires, you have light. In Cuba, light must be bought, and not just with money, but with privilege. Only those who can afford diesel generators, hotel owners, people with remittances, large businesses, can live like modern humans. The rest? Millions of Cubans live in the dark every night, studying by candlelight, cooking with flashlights, enduring the stifling heat with no fan, and watching their fridge become nothing more than an empty display box. Hospitals run on generators. So do schools, grocery stores, restaurants, even dental clinics. If they don't have a generator, they must shut down. On the streets of Havana, the most familiar sound is not laughter or salsa music, but the monotonous roar of dozens of generators running at once, competing to break the silence of the night. And that sound for Cubans is the voice of inequality. Generators in Cuba are not just machines, they are class indicators. With one, you live in light. Without it, you become a shadow, literally. A country in the 21st century where light was once considered basic and universal, now sees it transformed into a luxury commodity. Cuba is not lacking in electricity. Cuba is lacking in fairness, lacking in access to energy, lacking in opportunities for its people to live like normal human beings. And that is why, in a place that once dreamed of equality, today, light is something only the privileged and the generator owners can afford. What would you do if you had to trade your sleep, your meals, and your safety just to have a single light bulb on at night? Share your thoughts below. We want to hear your voice. Controlled connections, strangled information. In most countries, installing an iPhone app takes just a few seconds. But in Cuba, it requires a whole chain of complicated steps, patience, and even an underground network. Internet here is not only slow, but extremely restricted. Many international websites and services, including Apple's App Store, are completely blocked. This means people can't freely access or download apps like users in the rest of the world. To get around these barriers, Cubans must resort to all kinds of workarounds. First, they buy iCloud accounts from abroad, usually sold through unofficial channels, often by relatives in the US or via the digital black market. But even with an account, you still can't download apps, because the App Store is region-locked. At this point, the only solution is to use a VPN, but it's not as easy as just downloading one, because you can't download apps. People must install the VPN on a computer, then manually connect it to their phone. In some cases, they rely on local hackers, individuals with basic IT skills who act like underground tech repairmen, offering app installations, system setup, and firewall circumvention for a fee. All of this reveals a harsh reality. In Cuba, digital connection is not a basic right. It's a journey filled with barriers. In a world where technology is seen as the key to education, employment, and freedom of information, Cubans are forced to maneuver, compromise, and take risks just to access what the rest of the world considers obvious. This isn't just a story about internet speed or app stores. It's a mirror reflecting the extent of control, the technological divide, and the invisible limits that are holding back an entire nation in the digital age. Fuel crisis, when gasoline becomes pricier than food. In Cuba, refueling your car is no longer as simple as driving into a station and paying. Instead, it has become such a complex and exhausting process that it borders on absurd. In order to get fuel, citizens are required to register through an online platform, an ironic requirement in a country where internet access is unstable, painfully slow, and not everyone has the means to get online. But overcoming the digital barrier is only the beginning. Even after securing a booking, people still have to queue up with hundreds of others. under the scorching sun, and with minimal facilities. Some spend an entire day, others sleep overnight at the gas station just to ensure they don't lose their turn when the last drops of fuel are dispensed. This is no longer a public service, it's a fierce competition for survival on every journey. But the most shocking part lies in the numbers. The average monthly income for a Cuban citizen is less than $30, an amount insufficient to cover even basic fuel needs if prices continue to soar as they have. In this context, using a private vehicle is no longer a privilege. It's an economic burden. Many have been forced to switch to walking, cycling, or even giving up mobility altogether, paralyzing access to jobs, medical care, education, and daily life. The fuel crisis in Cuba is not merely a matter of shortage, it's a stark manifestation of structural economic collapse, where a basic commodity becomes a barrier to minimal living standards. It reveals a painful truth. In Cuba, freedom of movement no longer depends on will, but is restricted by every drop of gasoline, now more precious than people's time and energy. Cuba and the ration card system, feeding a nation grain by grain. In Cuba, you can't walk into a supermarket and buy as much rice as you want. You also can't freely purchase sugar, bread, or cooking oil based on your needs. Everything is distributed in fixed amounts, recorded in a small notebook called the Libreta de Abastecimiento. It's not a personal choice, but a nationwide food rationing system that has been in place for decades. Every citizen has a libreta, and inside is a detailed list of what you're entitled to. A few ounces of rice, a bit of sugar, a few pieces of bread. Everything is calculated per person, pre-divided for each month, with no flexibility, no extras. And obviously, never enough. When the rations run out, often just after a few days, people are forced to turn to another system, the black market. Their prices are many times higher, but it's the only place where you can buy additional food to keep your family going. No one likes it, but everyone must do it, because if you rely solely on the libreta, you won't have enough energy to work, study, or even survive. The problem isn't the little notebook. The problem is that an entire nation is still clinging to an outdated welfare system, while its production system can't meet even basic needs. When output is low, when imports are limited, when the national budget can't afford more subsidies, the libreta no longer guarantees security but becomes a symbol of stagnation, of a society surviving on bare minimum portions. And the most heartbreaking truth is this: Cubans are not hungry because they're lazy. They're hungry because they're trapped in a system that doesn't allow them to live proactively. A bag of rice cannot cure hunger if behind it lies an economy starved of supply and stripped of the freedom to trade. Cuba doesn't just lack food, it lacks the right to choose, and it lacks a way out of the vicious cycle of ration books and black markets. Dual exchange rates, when the dollar fuels Cuba's black market. In Cuba, the value of a dollar is not just a number. It's a symbol of two completely different realities. The official exchange rate imposed by the government is 110 cup USD, but out there on every street corner, in every underground transaction, the dollar is traded for up to 3 times that amount, reaching 350 cup USD. And it's this black market rate that people trust, use, and live by. This massive gap doesn't just create imbalance, it tears the economy into two parallel worlds. On one side is the banking system, where the dollar is trapped in an artificial exchange rate. On the other is the black market, where real cash, real food, and real goods are exchanged at real value, but without laws, without protection, without trust. Those who receive remittances from abroad must choose: sell their dollars to the state at a pittance, or risk the black market to retain the true value of their money. Import stores only accept payment in dollars, turning the Cuban peso into a worthless internal paper with no role in international trade. And from there, everything, from meat, milk, to medicine, becomes a delicacy reserved only for those with dollars and the guts to navigate the underground rules. The exchange rate disparity is not just an economic equation. It's a mirror reflecting the breakdown of trust, where people understand this truth. If you follow the rules, you grow poorer every day. But if you break the rules, you survive. In Cuba, a single dollar doesn't just buy goods. It buys you a place in the ranks of the survivors. And as long as two exchange rates exist, this economy will never be unified. Because even money here is living a double life. If you lived in Cuba, what would you do? Sell your dollars at the government rate to keep your hands clean, or break the rules to stay alive? Share your choice and your reasons below. We want to hear your voice. Cuba, where time doesn't move, only stands still. Step into Cuba, and you won't feel like you're living in the present, but as if you've been pulled backward in time. Not because of museums or restored architecture, but because the entire country seems to exist as if the 1960s, 1970s never ended. Across the streets, vintage American cars from the Cold War era still run proudly, defying modern engineering logic. Time-worn houses with rusted tin roofs and peeling paint recall a past that seems centuries away. But Cuba's backwardness isn't just visible, it's embedded in how society functions. Bureaucratic procedures still rely on paper, ink pens, and red stamps. There is no digitized system, no QR codes, no electronic databases. To register for a basic service, you must wait in line, fill out handwritten forms, submit photocopies, and wait weeks for results, if you're lucky. It feels like the entire country has been frozen in an era the rest of the world has long left behind. But the key point is, this isn't a preservation choice. It's the outcome of stagnation, lack of investment, and prolonged isolation. Cuba was once among the most developed nations in the region in the mid-20th century, but after sanctions, the system gradually collapsed. With no access to imported technology, insufficient funds to modernize infrastructure, and no means to embrace digital transformation, Cuban society is stuck in loops of the past. While many countries are entering the 5G era, automation, and AI, Cuba still operates as if the internet never existed. This is not just a technological gap, it's a generational divide. And with each passing day, the scariest part is that people are slowly learning to accept this present as normal, simply because they've never experienced anything else. Cuba is not merely old-fashioned. It is a living embodiment of forgotten time. Cuba, export is paradise, production is hell. In Cuba, farming does not equal ownership. One of the clearest examples is the tobacco industry, a national symbol, a source of export pride, and one of the country's most globally recognized products. But behind the expensive Havana cigars lies a tightly controlled system, where farmers are only allowed to keep 10% of their own harvest. Specifically, 90% of the harvested tobacco must be surrendered to the state, following a centralized distribution plan. The purchase price is set by the government, usually far below the international market rate. Only the remaining 10% may be kept by the farmers for retail. If they can find buyers, avoid inspections, and if what's left is still good enough after handing over the best portion to the system. This isn't just a management mechanism, it's a stark manifestation of an outdated and unjust subsidized economic model. Workers lose the right to decide the fate of their labor, have no motivation to invest in quality, and must live entirely dependent on state agencies. A farmer may toil through the entire season, only to receive a tiny fraction of the value they produced, both materially and in terms of control. This situation reflects the suffocation of autonomy in production, and more deeply, the imbalance between those who generate wealth and the system that collects and redistributes it. In a world where market forces and individual rights are increasingly valued, Cuba still operates on an old logic. The state decides everything, and the people merely carry it out. No power, no internet, but Cuba still laughs. Cuba may overwhelm you with paradoxes, daily blackouts, snail-paced internet, skyrocketing prices, and food becoming a luxury. But amid this bleak picture, what moves us isn't the scenery, it's the people. Cubans live in constant shortage, not just of material goods, but of opportunity, choice, and global connection. Yet they do not complain. On the contrary, they face reality with their signature humor, biting satire, and a spirit so optimistic it's almost unbelievable. This is not naivete, it's a survival skill refined through generations. You'll easily find a taxi driver telling political jokes as if they were fairy tales, or a fruit vendor joking that having electricity today is a delicacy. Even though they are fully aware of the flaws in the system, they still choose to hold on to kindness, laughter, and decency as a way to cope with uncertainty. Strangely enough, it is precisely within this scarcity that their hospitality becomes even more sincere and touching. Cubans don't wait until they have extra to share. They share because they deeply understand the value of every meal, every sip of water, and every moment with someone beside them. And that's what makes Cuba different. Not the classic cars cruising down the streets, or the sense that time has frozen, but because in a society that feels suffocating, people still know how to smile, not to hide the pain, but to keep on living and to keep on loving. Cuba doesn't need lights to shine, because that light already lives in every heart that knows how to laugh and embrace each other through the darkest days. What do you think, between a world of abundance yet loneliness, and a place of scarcity but filled with laughter? Where would you choose to live? Your comment will complete the story. Cuba is not just a country. It is a living warning. What happens when the state controls both the wallet and the dreams of its people? Here, even a can of Coca-Cola can be seen as a political threat. And freedom is not suppressed by violence, but by the lack of choice so deep that no one remembers they ever had it. In my view, the scariest thing about Cuba is not the scarcity, but when people forget they once had the right to dream and to choose. What about you? Between risky freedom and controlled stability, which would you choose? We always want to hear from you. Share your thoughts below. And if you want to keep receiving sharp insights on global economics, finance, and geopolitics, don't forget to hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss any of our next videos.